Welcome to Smart Energy, a podcast where we talk about electrification, home improvement, and clean energy. I'm Andrew Zellner, Editor-in-Chief at Ohm Connect.
And I'm Kelsey Bourgeois, Senior Editor here at Ohm Connect.
Ohm Connect is on a mission to rally people to change how and when they use electricity, unlocking clean, affordable, and reliable energy. You can learn more and get paid to conserve energy at ohmconnect.com. Happy New Year, Kelsey.
Happy New Year. What are your resolutions?
That's a tricky one. I've gotten out of the resolution game because I'm just all about positive improvement. I don't feel like I've reached peak self yet,
but you're close.
But I'm getting there. I'm very close.
You're like
I'm
a week away.
Close.
Yeah. I know that about you, is that you're like a week away from your perfect self. As I was reading about New Year's resolutions over the break, we were very fortunate to get a little time off over the winter holidays, and I like science, especially like pop science, and so I especially like to read kind of the thing that the people who actually did the studies would probably be mad about, where they simplify it down to say something really simple that the scientists would probably caveat a lot themselves. But anyhow, the one that really struck me was about setting resolutions or goals or anything, and about whether or not you should set them negatively or positively. Meaning, negatively, I'm going to stop doing X, Y, and Z. I'm going to stop using social media so much, for example. Versus I'm going to start going to the gym more. And what they found was that people who framed their goals in the positive sense of I'm going to start doing something were something like 14% more likely to keep those goals.
That's pretty interesting.
I thought so.
When I think about like self-reflection and like, I immediately go to like the bad habits I have.
You're right.
And it sounds like, not necessarily like stopping doing things or like getting rid of bad habits, but it's about doing new things that potentially also get you away from those bad habits.
That's exactly what it was. So it could be the same thing you're trying to do, but you set the goal a different way, right? Mm-hmm. So say the goal is, I want to use social media less. You could say, I want to use social media less, or you could choose a replacement habit that's going to be motivating in a positive way. So I want to read more. I'm going to read more, right? And so then you have this free time, and your choices between social media and reading, it's a little more motivating to have something to reach for that you want, versus just don't do social media. And then you're sitting there like, well, but I really would like to turn off my brain in that way. It's like, well, there's other ways to relax your brain, and you've chosen one that you are going to find better in the long run, right?
Yeah, definitely one thing I noticed in my life is sort of like a lot of relatively mindless media consumption.
Same.
Like we were off between Christmas and New Year's, and Jill, also my wife, like wasn't working during that time, and so we were spending more time together at home in like weekend mode. And like I would sit down in the living room and like reach to turn on the TV, and it's like, could we not have the TV on during the day? Because like we usually don't have it on during the day because we're like working doing other stuff. And yeah, it's just like I feel like I can, for whatever reason, I can like focus better when there's like other distractions going on, and it's like probably not true at all. It's like terrible.
Well, but I know what you're talking about, because I have that same belief about myself too, and I don't think it's true. I think it feels that way because as you and I have talked about at length, our attention spans are just abysmal at this point. And so there's something about having another thing to focus on where you're switching. It's actually, you're context switching, because anytime you're focusing on more than one thing, which, I think does help, particularly some neurodivergent people, there really is some value to having an extra input that actually does help them focus. Myself, I'm neurotypical, and I think I'm kidding myself with that. I think I'm just asking my brain to work harder, and something about making it work harder can sometimes help me do a task I've been avoiding. That's kind of how I see it and conceptualize it. I don't know if that's right. I will also say my partner has set the goal of not picking up his phone in the morning, because he identified, I'm waking up in the morning, I'm opening my phone, and I'm reading the news. And both of us find it important to be informed citizens.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. It's not that he doesn't want to do that, but he's finding that if he starts that in the morning, he will get sucked in, and he works for himself. So now he spent hours, and he's like deep in the details of a war that he's not directly personally a part of. And then his day is shot. And again, it's not that that's not important to stay informed. We both feel that it is, but choosing when and how you consume that is actually really quite important.
Um, I've been thinking a lot about like smartphone usage stuff. It feels like that, like on, as I was mindlessly scrolling social media, one of the things that like kept popping up was like these questions about like, in the 90s, did you really just like leave home and like nobody had a way to contact you?
You were
Like
just free.
you were just free, just like out there, and then you came home.
Yeah,
And it's
we
like
did.
that's totally the case. And like I have like older parents and relatives, and I feel like I should be able to be contacted in like a timely, efficient manner.
Yes.
And so like that's like one of the reasons why I sort of always have my phone with me.
Mm-hmm.
But like there have been, I don't know, 2 times in the last 5-10 years where like it was super urgent that I answer a phone call right away and respond to
Yes.
something. And like I'm glad I had my phone at those times, but if that message or if like it had gone to voicemail and I checked it later, or like I don't know, there's so like I'm like, should I get a landline? Like,
I
should I
mean,
just have a phone on the wall that rings when it's important?
that's a good question. So I think it's worth separating the emergencies out into two buckets. And one is there something I'm going to be able to do about this immediately? So for those of us who care for family members who are maybe ill or elderly, am I the person who needs to be reachable right away? Children would be another example. Do I
Sure.
have someone under my care for whom I need to be available immediately? Or would this be something that I heard about later that is an emergency and is very scary? There's nothing I can do about it immediately. So if I hear about it an hour or two later, I might feel weird about it, but it's not going to change the outcome of the event itself. And maybe that's the separation. The other thing I'll say about a phone on the wall, a lot of people are transitioning to flip phones. Like I choose the internet when I choose the internet, and then I have a flip phone for calling and texting, right? And that's what
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my friends with preteens are doing. They're like,
Sure.
my teen does not need internet, but I actually do need to call my preteen, and they need to be able to call me, which makes a lot of sense to me
Mm-hmm.
about how kind of limitations, and maybe that's the trend. We're going back a little bit to something simpler.
I think too, like there is the option to delete apps off of your phone.
So true.
And you can also, with the rise of robocalling, my phone does not like ring me unless it's somebody in my contacts.
Right. Right.
And I could be even choosier about like who rings me
Yes.
when they're in my contacts.
Yeah, you can just say your favorites, like at least on an
Yeah.
iPhone, you can just go, here are the 5 people who are allowed to call me right now. Which, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't have more than 5 people calling me regularly anyway.
No, well, it's like if somebody calls me and like I recognize their name, I instantly have like dread, like something wrong has happened.
Same. Yeah. And I wonder how much of that is a feature of our age as well, that we're both millennials, where it's like, why are you calling me? This doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, then like thinking about having a landline or like the idea that the phone could just ring and I have no idea who it is.
Spooky.
Is like
spooky.
But like that was the world for so long,
I know, we're making ourselves seem very young, that we're like, scary. Wow, we didn't know who it was. So thinking about those habits and sort of finding like positive ways to frame goals and things, it had me thinking about climate change, because also I started the Kim Stanley Robinson book, The Ministry for the Future, which I can highly recommend if you haven't read it. It's a climate fiction piece, and it's very scary because it is climate fiction, but also is it climate fiction? Because it's all very possible things that could happen in the very near future. I mean, it kind of picks up in 2024. So that scares me, but also it has been pretty motivating. So one of the habits I'm going to pick up this year is composting, because I've learned so much about food waste and the methane, and that it's much better to keep it here in my neighborhood and compost it, and then that soil can then draw down carbon. I'm then feeding the local produce, and so, it's not the end of the world. My personal family home food waste is not the end of the world. But I do feel really inspired to do a little more.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels more attainable to me than, stopping driving my car, which, as you know, is not an option for me. I live in a
Yeah.
food desert. I need to drive my car, and it's a combustion engine, and it will be until it dies.
Yeah.
So I can limit that, but it's a little better for me to pick up habits. So I don't know. What are your climate related things you're doing or thinking about?
So we've been working on sort of, post holiday, New Year's fresh start cleaning, all that sort of stuff. Like I'm a serial remodeler, DIYer.
Yes.
Like we've been shuffling things all around our home, like since we moved in. Like, you start working on the kitchen and then you're like, oh, where do I keep this thing that I would keep in the kitchen, but like
Yeah.
the kitchen isn't able to keep it there.
Yeah.
So we've been making like kind of a lot of decisions on where we put things, and then like getting rid of things we don't have room for, and agreeing to only buy things when we need them and have room for them, and sort of like reevaluating our stuff. My wife is much better about that. Like we joke that she could like put some underpants in a backpack and like leave and like wouldn't feel like she left anything behind,
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And I definitely sway in the other direction. Like I have hobbies and tools and things, and those things, it's weird. Like those things bring me joy sometimes, and
Hmm.
sometimes those things like just like weigh me down and like make me more depressed because I'm not actively using them.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so really, being more of a conscious consumer. We didn't spend it like, we also like didn't get big holiday presents for, each other, and instead we're like, oh, like we're going to get some ice skates and like do more ice skating this winter, like
Oh, that's nice.
and enjoy the outside more than we have previously.
I love that. And I will say about the having a lot of items, I think this can go the other way. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the criteria I try to use when I'm thinking about whether I need to buy something is, do I have something similar that could be adjusted to use this? And in your case, I feel like what I know about you with your DIY stuff is like there's a lot of stuff you keep around that probably will come in handy, but maybe not for like 2 or 3 years and in a very specific circumstance. And so, on
Mm-hmm.
one hand, it's like, well, holding on to it for then when you don't need to buy something new makes some sense, right? But on the other hand, like, yeah, do you just kind of have a bunch of stuff? But I really like that way of thinking about things. Do I really need this? Do I have something similar?
Mm-hmm.
The other criteria is like, does this set me back from a financial goal? And is that worth it to me? Is whatever this thing I want worth it to hit against that other goal? Um, and then, but when I'm reading all these conscious consumerism pieces and I'm thinking about the various sustainable lifestyle things, using stuff you already have. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how can I do that? And I think there's some real value there as well. Or borrowing is another one, right? Like, who does someone have this? Do I need this for all the time, or do I need this for right now?
I think that's, I started down my like tool buying and like DIYing before the rise of like the sharing economy.
Uh-huh.
And if I were to like move into a home today and I didn't already have all of these tools, I would just go to the Minneapolis tool library and,
Yeah,
like borrow them. Because like you said, they like specific tools come in like are super helpful at like very specific times, and it's like once every 3 years.
right, right. So do
uh,
I need to own that?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but I also feel like too, getting rid of a bunch of things I've accumulated with like the mindset that like I can always like get them again too feels like weird and like wasteful a little
Exactly.
bit.
Yes. No, I feel the same way. When I'm cleaning out things and I go, oh, I'll just buy this again if I need it. Like, ooh, that's not a good way to think about that.
Yeah. But it's also like part of living in a society. Like,
Yeah.
we made a couple of trips to the local reuse store. Like, we got some like windows that I had swapped out, but the windows are still good, and Habitat for Humanity Restore will like clean them and resell them.
Amazing.
And then like we also go to the restore when we need, specific things for our home. Doors especially. Like, doors are crazy expensive when you buy them new, and
Yes.
more than likely there's one that will fit your house at a salvage store, restore.
Yeah, which is honestly so cool. The other thing I'll shout out for less intense, like less home improvement stuff, but more just things in your house are your local Buy Nothing group on Facebook. I am obsessed with mine, and I used it a ton over the break because
Mm-hmm.
we were gifted like a set of new pots and pans. I don't cook. I couldn't tell you what's special about them, but something special about them. But we have this set of old ones that are fine. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with them. They're working fine. And so I put them on the local Buy Nothing group. Someone was here and picked them up in 20 minutes and was so excited to have a new set of pots and pans. And that felt so good to be like, great, someone got a free set of cookware that they can use. And that's a circular economy. And that's also being neighborly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't know what's going on around you, being able to share things. And I think it's really lovely. You should join yours if you're not in it, people.
Yeah, ours is very active, and it actually got so active and so large that I think this fall it actually had to split into like
Uh-huh.
three like smaller neighborhood groups.
Yeah, right.
Um, yeah, but it's also like fascinating, sort of like the range of things that people are giving away,
Yes.
and it's like, oh, I opened this food for my cat and he doesn't like it, and there's 12 more pounds.
I
Like,
did that,
yeah,
Andrew. I gave away we got dog food. Linus did not tolerate it. He got sick, but it's just because he's sensitive. The food is fine. Someone else with a bully breed came and got it and was so happy to not have to pay for the food. Like
yeah.
that. So yeah, I think it's really lovely.
I think there is sort of like a generational thing where like I feel like my parents feel like everything has inherent value, and like you should try to recover that value
Right,
if you're
right.
not going to keep it in your home. Where like just the idea of like being able to get it out of my small space is like so valuable. It's like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, I totally feel the same way. I value the space and I value the feeling of I didn't put this in the trash because it was
Hmm.
fine. It was just not the thing for me. And I mean, I gave away plant clippings this break because I have something like 45 plants. You've seen them, maybe
Hmm.
50. And when I clip them, I don't want to throw it away. They're so pretty and I'm so good at propagating them, but I don't have a space. I literally do not have space for more plants. So I had these plants that had been rooting in water for like 18 months. And I finally said, okay, someone have these. And again, someone was there in 20 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, and I think too, like I go through that as like, oh, I have this thing, and like I know I should probably get rid of it, but I kind of like wait, and
Yes.
then event like 18 months later, it's finally like I don't even remember why I was keeping these. These
Yeah,
things are
right,
like
right.
causing me more stress than anything,
Yes,
and
yes.
then you let them go.
Yeah, yeah, you let them go. Well, that was actually a lovely conversation about goal setting and conscious consumerism, which I think we can both take into account as we move through this year. Um, let's pivot into our guest for today. So it's Elysia Vannoy, and she is our regulatory affairs manager. She's wonderful. She is just a wealth of knowledge about the grid and utilities. She's been doing this forever. She has advanced degrees in it. I'm so excited for you all to hear my conversation with Elysia. So let's go to that, and I'll see you after. All right, today's guest is Elysia Vannoy. Elysia is the Regulatory Affairs Manager here at Ohm Connect. Welcome, Elysia.
Thanks, Kelsey. So nice to be here speaking with you this morning.
Oh, I'm so glad you agreed. Every conversation we've had has been so interesting. So I'm so excited to do it here for the podcast. So let's start with a little bit about your background. Can you tell me about your educational and work background? How you got into the energy sector originally?
Sure. Well, getting into the energy sector, it was definitely by accident. But to back up a little bit, I got my undergrad in economics, and then because I was having a hard time finding a job with just a BA in economics, so I was like, well, it seems like the popular thing to do at the time is go get an MBA. So I did that, and in the meantime, I got a job working for a really small economic consulting firm out in Truckee, California, and we
Uh-huh.
worked primarily with small government entities. But that's where I really got interested in like the public policy side of things
Mm-hmm.
because, in economics, you're taught, oh, if you come up with this great model, you can come up with these perfect solutions for government and everyone's going to love it. But then the reality of actual government institutions and how decisions are made. Even if you have a really great idea, sometimes they don't get implemented. So I really wanted to understand more about that, and so that kind of started my adventure into the political science world and studying public policy. So I ended up with a master's in political science as well. And in the meantime, this harkens to the importance of networking. My boss at the time, she encouraged me to join a group called Women in Economics. It was just a really small local group,
Yeah.
but they circulated a job posting for NV Energy, which is the main utility in Nevada. And I looked at it and I was like, I don't really have all the experience that this job description says, but hey, I'm going to go for it. And it all worked out. So I spent 5 years at NV Energy in the pricing group. And then I found myself here at OhmConnect, and it's been really exciting and a fun learning experience.
I love this story. First, I love this like energy of coming right out of your bachelor's. Like if you just have the best idea, it will win, right? um,
Yeah.
but that's how that is, right? My BA's in political science, and so I was almost coming at it with the other version of like the best idea doesn't seem to win as far as I could tell. That's a little cynical, but anyway, so this is real. And also I love the moment that the like women in economics helped you, where you applied for a job. I mean, this is me having my passion project in this podcast too, but like that's a note to women that if you don't qualify for everything in a job, you should still apply. You never know, you could turn out to be Elysia Vannoy.
Well, I don't know if that's something to aspire to, but yeah, definitely go for it if you see something. I feel like the best things in life happen when you go beyond what you think you can do.
Absolutely, absolutely. So maybe just if you could tell me just the top level of what it meant at NV Energy, that what pricing entailed. You don't have to go into a ton of detail, but just so people understand what that means.
Sure. So my specific group was responsible for, wait, let me back up a little bit. So we'll say at a utility, in order to collect the money that's needed to provide your electricity service, the utility has to go through this really big regulatory filing called a general rate case. And it takes a lot of people and a lot of work, but essentially the company determines how much money it's going to cost to provide energy service to all of its customers, and that is what is called the revenue requirement. So the revenue requirement has like all the things like operations, maintenance, a return on the company's investment. And so my group would take that revenue requirement and we would try and figure out how do we allocate these costs to customers in a manner that reflects how they're using the system. There is a lot more that goes into that, but I won't get into it because it can be
Yes,
really
sounds
boring
complicated.
and esoteric, complicated. But
But
really,
needless to say, a lot of work goes into deciding that, and you were doing that work.
yeah, yeah. Really fun, a great group of people. Learned a lot, but it's definitely a subject that you can go pretty deep down the rabbit hole.
Well, I can't ask you very many more questions about that, so I'm going to move to my next question. We're going to come back to pricing a little bit later anyway, but I would love to know, you and I have had a lot of conversations as I'm relatively new to the industry about uh, electricity, the grid, what has happened, what does happen. It's a lot to get your mind around, right? The grid is cited to be the most complicated machine ever, and all of these things like that. So I would love it if you wouldn't mind if you could just tell us a little bit about the history of electricity. How did the grid come about? When did most homes in the US have electricity in them? Anything you can share on that, just to give a primer for people.
Sure. I would say, well, I'm not a historian in this by any means, but I think that electricity was, the history of it goes really far back, as far as like, I don't know, maybe like 500 BC or something, when Greeks were trying to figure out like the very beginnings of electricity, like static electricity, magnetism, things like that. I'm sure a lot happened in between now and then, but I would say the probably like the pivotal moment was kind of this whole thing with Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, where Edison was, he created the light bulb and he established like the first distribution company. But he was primarily focused on direct current. So if anyone's into, you know, not the band.
AC/DC, the electrical currents.
Exactly. And Tesla, he was supportive of using alternating current, and developed like a system around that. But there was like this whole drama, and I think there's even a movie that was made about it, of which system's going to win out in the provision of electricity, and there's this whole thing. But
And which
basically, to
one
sum it
out?
up, yeah. So Tesla won out with AC, and Edison, he lost, which is, it's a bummer for him. But I think he still went on to be pretty successful.
I think he's
In the
fine.
Yeah, everyone knows his name, so he's good. But then I would say after that, I think it took probably like 40 or 50 years for it to become more widespread. So really, like in the 1960s. Hey, let me check my notes. I know that there was a really important um, federal policy that helped out. Oh, is the Rural Electrification Act,
Okay.
because so primarily developing the system, it happened in cities because everyone's much closer, and it's easier to develop infrastructure for people that are all concentrated in one area. So
Right.
once everyone in the cities had electricity, then it was like, we need to get this out to the rural people. So that's where the Rural Electrification Act came in, and really got power to homes in like the 1950s and 60s, and it's just really grown from there. Um, Going back to Edison and Tesla, though, I will say that DC is making a comeback because
Oh yeah.
there's a high voltage direct current transmission lines that a lot of people are in support of, but that's for the
They're
engineers to talk about.
they're in support of, but we haven't built them yet. Right now, we mostly have AC. Is that am I understanding that right?
Right. All of our
Okay.
transmission lines now are primarily AC.
Okay. Well, keep an eye out for the DC AC
Yeah, coming
feuds.
soon to a transmission line near you.
I love this. Okay, so like the 50s and 60s, and that Rural Electricity Act is what got it into rural America. I mean, we're having sort of a similar moment, there have been similar moments in the last 20 years with Wi-Fi, right? Where it was like a lot easier to, like, internet access was a lot easier to create in the cities, a lot harder to create in rural areas. So that's kind of interesting to see those parallels. Yeah, this is very interesting. So 50s or 60s, couple generations back. Is there anything more you want to share about the grid? I think a lot of our listeners will have this basic knowledge, but if you could just kind of talk me through it again, you kind of laid it out once for me in like 5 different parts of what the grid actually refers to, just as a primer.
Sure. So the grid's primarily composed of generation, which is how your electricity gets created. Then it's transmitted through transmission lines, so what everyone refers to as transmission. And then the energy on the transmission system, because it's in a really high voltage, it has to get stepped down to levels that are um, easier to transport across like smaller, shorter distances. So those voltages are stepped down through the distribution lines. Then it reaches a transformer somewhere near your house and it's further stepped down, and that goes through what's called a line extension into your house or apartment.
Okay, so the generation is the power plant, whether that's oil, gas, hydro, wind, solar, whatever the power generation source is, and then that's transmission, and then that goes to distribution. Did I get it right?
Yep, that's
Yes.
right.
And so distribution, those would be the power lines you see around your neighborhood. We're starting to bury more and more of those, right? We want those to be buried because it's going to be safer for us. Is that, yeah. Okay.
Right.
So Elysia, as we talked about earlier, you've done a lot of pricing work. Could you tell customers a little bit more, consumers a little bit more about what goes into the bill that they get, how that's decided?
Sure. So again, that goes back to that really fun regulatory filing called the general rate case, but taking all of the costs to serve the customer, so generation, transmission, distribution, all of the things, customer service, vegetation management, all of these things get allocated out to the different customer classes. So for residential customers, really what they get on their bill is you get your rate and that's tied to your usage. So the really funny thing about energy usage, especially for residential customers, is it's something that happens in the background. It's not something that we all think about a lot, right? Like, you want to take a hot shower, you want to do your laundry, you want to watch TV, kids want to play video games. So all of these social activities are really what drives our electricity bill because you don't, well, I mean, I would say that the average person isn't going to turn on their TV and think, oh, this is going to cost me what, like 50 cents to watch a
Right.
movie.
Right. No, we don't think like that about it. You and I
No.
might, but
Yeah, yeah. But really what comes down to your bill is depending upon how your rate is constructed. You can either have a flat rate or a time of use rate where your rate changes depending on the time of day. So really it's just, when do you use your electricity if you're on the time of use rate and how much did you use during those times? And that's what's going to show up on a customer's bill at the end of the month.
yeah, so pretty straightforward. And the reason for the time of use rates is because there are certain times when a lot of people want energy. Is that right? Is there more that goes into how those times are chosen? I'm sure there's a lot more, but is there a little more that you can share about why those times are more expensive?
Yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. We can go back to the fun economics piece of supply and demand. So when everyone wants something all at once and there's only a limited supply, it's going to cost you more money. But a lot of this goes back to, we're limited in how much generation we have typically. We're limited into, how much energy can pass through a transmission line or a distribution circuit. So when there's a lot of energy demand, we would assign more cost to those hours. So you're going
Right.
to have your on-peak hours are reflecting of those high cost hours, and your off-peak hours are when there's a lot of available capacity to serve demand.
Right. That makes sense. And it's part of what we do here at OhmConnect. So obviously, if you are a member of OhmConnect, you're getting messages where we're telling you, hey, prices are spiking. Could you use a little less? And you're going to save money because you're not using as much energy during those expensive times. You're also relieving stress on the grid, right? Because it's that time
Right.
when demand is high. So just to put a little bit more context around that. Okay, so let's move a little bit on to your title and the regulation, because this sector is pretty regulated, but it also varies really drastically state to state. And this is something it's really complicated, but I'm curious about if you can tell us about the main regulatory mechanisms in place on the energy sector. What are they? How do they function? What's important to know?
Sure. So the different regulatory bodies are you have FERC at the federal level, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. You also have the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, that's NERC. You have the state public utility commissions or public service commissions, and so they're primarily regulating everything that goes on in the state. So whether it's like an investor-owned utility, a telephone company, all sorts of different utilities. And then as well as states that have membership in regional transmission organizations or within like an independent system operator, those are the ones that are actually like running the grid. And then at kind of like a separate as an aside, like U.S. Department of Energy, like they're primarily they're not really developing regulations, but they shape a lot of national energy policy and also distribute like funds and grants and things like that. And then of course the EPA. So for um, anything with the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, those have a lot of implications for different types of power plants.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So there's federal ones, there's state ones, there's regional ones, and then we have the DOE and the EPA. So a lot of organizations involved in electricity and how we're allowed to use it, how we're allowed to sell it, what happens. What do you think is most is there anything really relevant from those regulatory bodies that you think is worth noting that's unique in a certain state or anything like that? It's okay if the answer is no.
Well, every state is different. So, you can have like a wildly varying policies on different things. Even just going to the whole cost of service analysis and things like that. Every state has kind of its own flavor as far as its regulations for how investor-owned utilities can recover their costs. So a lot of things can be similar, but there's a lot of nuances that are there too.
Right, and it is very state by state. I know a lot of states. Some states have very little regulation, like Texas, and some states have a lot of regulation, and some have somewhere in the middle. Am I getting that right, or am I confused?
I don't think there's any shortage of regulations in any state to be fair, but they're all just different and special in their own way.
Yeah. Um, okay, so tell us more about what that looks like for your job. So your job is regulatory affairs manager. So what does that look like for you? What are you following, keeping tabs on?
Definitely keeping tabs on what's going on with the state public utilities commissions in any states that we work in. I spent a lot of time in California because California is a very busy place on the regulatory front, especially for demand response. But keeping track of what's going on in New York and Texas as well is it's part of my job. But um, really the main focus is advocating for policies that support demand response. And that is a pretty tough job because there's a lot of different people that have a lot to say about demand response and how it can operate in a state.
Really? So I guess my assumption, my maybe naive assumption would be that people would like demand response and that because it helps loosen that stress on the grid, it gives us some more flexibility so that we don't have power outages and things. But I guess it sounds like it's a little more complicated about how it functions.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated. I won't bore the listeners with the nitty-gritty details, but there's a lot surrounding, how can demand response interact with customers? How can we receive customer data? How can customers authorize their data?
Sure.
There's a whole host of issues to work around on that
Right. I
front.
mean, that's one of the most complicated things because in order to do demand response, we need some information about what the demand is. And so one piece is getting that information is complicated. And we have to be careful about how that's done. Maybe you could tell us sort of what would your pitch be if you're advocating for more demand response? Like what would you say at a party about why you think it's the right thing and why we should be doing more of it?
Sure, I would say, especially for residential customers, residential customers don't have a ton of control over their bill, and nor is there, a really great way for them to participate in these regulatory proceedings. So I feel like demand response, especially for residential customers, we can say, like, here's this opportunity for residential customers to make a really big impact on the grid and, give people some control over their usage and how it's affecting things. I would say that especially the peak load reductions, especially in California when there's a big heat wave and the grid is really stressed. It's great for people to be able to come together. And you might think, like, I'm only one person making a small change in my usage, but you add that up across hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, it really does make a difference. And it's important to recognize, the really strong impact that that can have when the grid needs it the most.
I love that piece of like being able to do it because it's a small change. It's not a drastic, it's not a turn all the electricity in your house off. It's like change one or a couple little things. And if everybody does that, we're going to avoid a big problem. And that's kind of cool to be able to, yeah, like you said, have that control. I'm guessing most consumers don't, these levels up of regulation and, above retailing, like it's complicated. We don't know about it. We don't spend any time thinking about it. We just want to know that electricity gets to our house. And
Right.
this is the piece, and this is the piece where we have some control over that. Like, well, if we're careful, we can make sure everyone gets electricity to their house. That sort of leads me into my next question, which is about our transition to clean energy. Obviously, that's something we're really invested in at OhmConnect, and one of the things that we care about. I'm curious about your thoughts on our transition to clean energy. Do you feel hopeful about it? What indicators do you look at on our progress there? How do you think about it?
Sure. I definitely feel hopeful. There's a lot of people out there that are dedicated to conducting research, developing better products, innovating services to tackle, all of the various sides of the energy transition, whether it's generating energy or developing more efficient ways to use energy. But it's really complicated, and I think it's important to recognize that, some people believe in climate change, other people say that it's not a thing, but I would say to anyone, we can't deny that humans have an incredible impact on the planet. You can just look around and see the built environment, all of these things that we've done to change the landscape, and all the things that we do to change things that we can't see, like air quality. I mean, sometimes you can see that, but there's a lot of things that go into the air that we can't really see. And
Yes. Oh.
really understanding that everything is connected. We're all connected. And, if we're doing something bad in one area, the chances are is it's going to come out in another area just by virtue of the wind blowing. So, just keep that in mind. We're just one person, but small things and small changes that we do can have really big impacts when we all do them together.
Yeah, I love that. I love the piece of, yeah, there are folks who, don't believe in climate change or maybe don't think it's as serious or whatever it is. But the piece of like there's no doubt that we have an impact on the world, on the earth. Like you said, we've changed it, we've changed the air quality. I think we can all feel that in our lungs and see that. And I think we all want to have clean air, clean water, safe environments for ourselves and our children to thrive. So that's something hopefully we can all get behind. And then, the thing that also makes me really hopeful about clean energy is just how cheap it's getting. That, it seems like there's economic reasons to transition. So are there any other things that make you feel hopeful about that transition?
I mean, we've got companies like OhmConnect that are out there, trying to enable everyone to participate on a pretty easy level. Like, you don't have to buy anything to participate in OhmConnect. It definitely helps if you have some type of device that you can connect. But really, like, you can start small and you can make a big impact. And That's really cool to be able to do that from just one little Ohm Connect. And I know there's tons of other companies that are working in the clean energy space and trying to make it easier for people to participate in the clean energy transition.
Yeah. I feel the same way. And we're also, we're seeing more and more money go to it and we're seeing it get cheaper. So I'm glad to hear that you also feel very hopeful. Um, Other predictions for the future or things you'd like to see more of in our industry? Like if you had your way, what would your magic wand situation be on the energy industry? What would you like to see?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Let me think. I mean, I would say that I'll keep it kind of Ohm Connect focus here. I
Okay.
would say that the one thing that I would like to see is that customers have better access to their energy data so that they can make smart decisions based on it. Because I think, as we discussed earlier, it's an invisible thing that we don't really think about. And so, unless you have a way to really have some type of analysis or something done on your meter data so that you can see like, oh, like maybe these are the behaviors that I'm doing that are driving my energy costs. Like maybe I could change something around in my life or shift my schedule around a little bit, save a little bit of money. But to be able to do that, the customer has to have easy access to their data and authorizing that data to other people that can make use of it and transform it into like a more digestible chunk of information rather than just saying, here's a button you can download your usage data. Like I can't imagine anyone downloading
Right,
their
right.
meter data and trying to make sense of it.
It's
It's
probably just you and people like you who are like, that's interesting. I'm going to read that. But you're right that I love the piece of if that information was simpler, easier to understand, had clear takeaways, which is part of what we're doing here is trying to give that to people, right? When you
right.
said there's all these invisible things, the thing that came to my mind is what we call energy vampires. These appliances that are drawing energy when you're not using them, and that just is so silly. Like when you start to think that you are paying money for a thing when you're not even using it. Like, I don't know if other people feel this way, but when I learned about that, I felt very frustrated. And I thought, okay, that's like such low-hanging fruit to get rid of those things. And like you said, small shifts in our schedule or how we're doing things, but you have to have the information in order to make those choices. So we're doing what we can to get that information into people's hands so they can make choices for themselves. So love
We
it.
certainly are.
Love it. Cool. All right. Well, this has been a really lovely conversation, Elysia. I'm going to ask you one more question that I try to ask everybody, which is if listeners walk away from this conversation with one thing, what would you hope that it is?
I would hope that listeners walk away knowing that just making small changes can have a big impact. And if you need more energy saving tips, I know that we have a ton of them. And, just maybe, the new year just started. Maybe grab a new energy saving tip each week and see if you can implement it in your home. And who knows, at the end of 2024, you might have just like knocked 20% off your energy bill. I don't know. Just an idea, but it's the small things that count. So don't feel like you can't do anything. Like you do have some control.
I love that. That's a really beautiful message. And also, you just plugged the blog, which is my job. So, yes, I have a lot of energy saving tips for you on our blog. You can find them. That's linked in our show notes. So, all right, Elysia, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you hopping on and sharing your expertise and your background. I feel more hopeful after talking to you every time. So, great.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey. It was great speaking with you.
Every week, we take a question from a listener, and this week's question is from Jill. So, Jill says, I'm taking down my holiday decorations, and I've realized one of my string lights is totally burnt out. Can I throw these in the trash, or am I supposed to be recycling them in a special way?
So that is a fantastic question, and so I'd always heard that like you shouldn't throw out Christmas lights, And so immediately, you go to like, do I put them in the recycling? Is there a special place you need to take them? And actually, so Christmas string lights are like super recyclable.
Oh,
They're
great.
like full of copper. There's like enough value there to like warrant their recycling. The thing is, because they're string and like copper, if they go through like standard recycling machinery, they like bind up the machines. Like they're actually like
Oh,
bad for regular machines, which is
got it.
why you don't just like stick them in your recycling.
Got it.
But because they're valuable, there are tons of places to take them. When I started looking for places in the Twin Cities, like all of our Ace Hardware stores have like special string light collection boxes like year round.
Oh my gosh.
And like January especially, there are a bunch of like regular collection, like gift, like holiday decoration recycling things beyond just string lights. um
That's perfect.
yeah
So you do need to recycle it a special way, but basically you just do a Google, just
yeah
do a quick Google, and you'll find out where they need to be taken. And if you're a real good Samaritan, you could ask all your friends, do you have any string lights you'd like me to drive to the recycling
yeah, it's sort of
center?
like a reverse Grinch kind of thing.
So true. So true. Well, but I love that. I've been thinking a lot about precious metals recycling because we had this piece go up over the break about proper tech recycling, and
Hmm.
it's really important largely because our tech has these precious metals, and a lot of them are they're really recyclable.
Yeah.
Like, we can keep using those materials. They are not dead just because the device is. And every time we reuse that material versus having to excavate and mine more, that's great because our mining practices are a little spooky. The
I
more we
would
can keep
I
our
would I would go as far as like truly scary. But
yeah, spooky's too light. I think you're right. They're scary and perhaps heinous in some cases. So the more we can keep our current precious metals that are in our circulation, the more we can keep them in circulation. That's great. That's great for society.
I will say, if there are not places locally, if you don't live in a city, there are a handful of places online that will like let you send your Christmas lights back to them. They'll also give you like a discount on purchasing new ones.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was like way easier to recycle string lights than I thought, and it's like
Yes.
now we've got our box of ones that didn't work when we plugged them in this year, and I can just take them to the hardware store next time I go.
And you do go to the hardware store a lot,
I'm
so
there every
fine.
day. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, recycle consciously, consume consciously. If all of us do a little bit, that equals an incredible amount. So,
Well, that's it for this episode of Smart Energy. Special thanks to Elysia for the deep dive into utility markets and Jill for sending in a question. To see the show notes, send feedback, and learn more about Smart Energy, visit ohmconnect.com/smartenergy. Stay safe, conserve some energy, and we'll see you next time.